This is the Benefits Buzz Podcast, your weekly pulse on what's happening in the world of employee benefits. Brought to you by your friends at WEX, who believe in simplifying benefits for everyone. Now listen up and let's get buzzed! Hey everyone, welcome to Season 4 of the Benefits Buzz Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Pilla. I'm joined with Kelsey Burgad. Kelsey, we're on video. What's happening?
I don't know what we got ourselves into. I'm both excited and a little bit nervous to be on video every day, but welcome to our homes. We're still working from home.
We are. What happens when you have a face for radio and a voice for print? They decide to make the podcast a video. I don't know what they were thinking, our producers, but here we are. This will be fun. Yeah. So those of you who are used to listening, we have a new video portion. Obviously, you can probably tell of us talking about it, but feel free to watch if you want to try that way instead. I feel like it's one of those things, when you listen to somebody on the radio and you imagine what their voice might be, and then you actually see them, you're like, oh, that's what they look like. I'm sure there's a lot of people kind of doing that head scratcher right now.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I don't know, Kelsey. But anyway, we will forge on. We were Season 4. We can't wait. And how appropriate. We wrapped up Season 3. We had the Executive Vice President of Operations at WEX Health here, Chris Bird, on the show. And the election had just taken place. Biden had been kind of just announced the winner. There was lots of lawsuits going on. And Chris did his best job at saying, okay, here's what I think is going to happen, but there's a lot of shoes that need to drop yet before we know what's going to happen. Primarily, a lot of the Congress work that need to take place in Georgia in the election. And what a phenomenal way. So we were left hanging in the balance. And so Season 4, we kick off with this, I'm going to use air quotes here. You can see me, Blue Wave, right? We had a lot of changes since we left off, and we've got some results. The results are in, folks. And we've got our Executive Vice President, Chris Bird, back to talk about what does this mean, this blue wave, or maybe it's more of a ripple. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Has it been that long? Has it been like 3.5 months?
Doesn't it feel like we're together all the time?
Recording
podcasts?
They tell you that, like, when you're a kid, like, time goes really slow. And as you get older, time goes faster and faster. I'm getting really old. I was looking and I was like, holy moly, it was like November. And now it's February, right? We're halfway to Memorial Day, for crying out loud.
I love it. I don't know where the time goes either. I know, which is surprising when I've been locked in my house for all these months. But, well, we're happy to have you back. It's going to be a fantastic episode. And I want to dive right into this, Chris, because, right, we have had some changes, right? So we call this the blue wave, sort of with the question mark. There's a lot of things that have happened. And again, everyone knows we kind of made light of this, that sort of your night job is really to be the pulse of what's happening in legislation and on DC and on the Hill. And we wanted to kick off Season 4 with you commenting on what has happened. Where are we at? What does this mean for healthcare? So I want to hit you with the first kind of open-ended question, which is, right, the Dems win, the presidency and the Senate, but there were some loss of seats in the House. So we kind of had some things rearrange a little bit. But essentially, what did the 2020 election mean for Americans and how they feel about issues, and specifically around healthcare?
It was a closer election than I think anybody expected it to be. The presidency wasn't terribly close. I don't think it was quite a landslide, but it wasn't terribly close. But you mentioned the House and you mentioned the 50-50 split in the Senate, right? It was a pretty tight election. I think the election, first and foremost, was probably more about Donald Trump than anything else. But Donald Trump's coattails or lack thereof weren't very long in this election, right? So you saw a lot of people who obviously voted for Biden, but then voted for the Republican when they went down ticket, which is a little bit unusual. And so what we really have is, for lack of a better term, it's really kind of a mixed message. I think what it says is that Americans really aren't ready for profound change, but they were ready for some change, particularly change in the mood in the national sort of psyche and the messages coming out of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. That I think that's pretty clear. But in terms of sweeping policy changes, I think the message was one of, we're a bit more of a centrist country, right? We spend a lot of time talking about people on the left and the right, and on perhaps the fringes of both of those. But I think the vast majority of the people were kind of looking for some return to normalcy. What does that mean with respect to healthcare? There still are issues, I think, that people are dealing with that they would like to see the government deal with. Access to healthcare, the number of uninsured is higher than anybody would like it to be. Healthcare costs continue to go up, but there doesn't seem to be a mandate to have the government come in, take the whole thing over, and do something about it.
So we know a majority is a majority, and I hear you saying basically it's not black and white. People haven't made a decision necessarily one way or the other, but with those slight majorities in both the House and the Senate, what does that mean for future legislation? Because they're very minimal majorities.
Yeah, well, Eric, you mentioned it wasn't a blue wave, but by any sense of the word. And it's kind of in between two of the different scenarios that we were tracking, right? It's not a blue wave because you've got 50-50 in the Senate. You've got Pelosi only able to lose 5 or 6 seats in a very big House in order to get things done, right? So there wasn't, like I said, this sweeping mandate. On the other hand, it wasn't just sort of the change at the top either, because change at the top was this scenario that was based on the hypothesis that people really just wanted a change in the occupant of the White House, and they would keep the Senate in Republican hands. Well, of course that didn't happen, and one of the probably the biggest surprises to me between November when we last spoke and today was what happened in Georgia. Not that I discounted it entirely, but I didn't necessarily expect that the Democrats would win both of those races. And so I thought 51-49 was probably a reasonable outcome to put your money on, but here we are. So what does that mean? That means it's going to be hard to get things done. And it's going to be hard to get things done that involve a lot of change, because you're going to have to deal with the other side. All you have to do is flip a handful of moderate Democrats in the House. All you have to do is, you're going to become very, very familiar with 2 names in the Senate: Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, the 2 most centrist Democratic senators who are both from states that aren't completely blue. In fact, West Virginia is pretty red, right? And so you just lose one of those, and it doesn't matter. It's all over, with one exception, and it's this. You've probably read or heard a lot about the reconciliation process lately. And this is a process, it's called budget reconciliation, where you can get legislation through with a simple majority. And so if the House passes a reconciliation bill and the Senate passes that bill deadlocked 50-50 on a straight party line vote, then the vice president can break that tie and that bill becomes law. There are 3 reconciliation vehicles available to the Democrats in the current session of Congress, 2 this year and 1 next year. And the first one is probably going to be used. It looks like they're using the reconciliation process to pass the current COVID relief bill, the $1.9 trillion bill that everybody's talking about now that's supposed to be passed in March. But there will certainly be a second reconciliation vehicle later this year. And that vehicle will include lots of different things, including probably some tax reform and probably some more health care, right? So in one or both of those vehicles, you are likely to see some movement on health care, right? And we'll just have to wait and see what that looks like. And we can talk about that a little bit more as we go through the podcast. But I have had conversations. I've had conversations with Democratic staffers just in the last 2 or 3 weeks where they said, you know what? We don't think we can negotiate with the other side, and we don't think they want to negotiate with us. So we're just going to go ahead and we're just going to pass this thing on a party line vote. So all this talk of bipartisanship, I think it's going to be hard. The other thing that I would say, and this is really important to understand, right now, there's still a lot of hard feelings in DC, a lot of hard feelings. January 6th shook everybody up. It shook a lot of Democrats up. And they have hard feelings about every single one of those Republican lawmakers who voted against certifying the election on that date. And they're basically saying, I'm not going to work with these people for a while. How long that lasts is going to have a lot to say about how much gets done over the next 2 years.
It's just, I learn so much every time we chat with you. But you talked a little bit about tax reform, and that leaves me wondering, what's going to happen with the HSA, with the health savings account? Is that going to be looked at from a tax reform, or are the tax treatments going to change, or maybe increased eligibility? Anything like that you see coming in the future?
Well, first of all, I don't see HSAs. I don't see any real threat to HSAs. I don't see them being under attack. And the reason for that, quite frankly, is too many Democratic constituents have them and like them. And all but the most progressives on Capitol Hill, they get this. They understand this. One of the things that I've had the experience of doing is going into a lot of Democrat offices over the last 2 years. And that mood has very, very much shifted, right? Once you have tens of millions of people, they hear from their constituents. People like HSAs, right? So I don't think that HSAs are going to be under any attack. On the other hand, meaningful expansion, higher contribution limits and those kinds of things, those are really off the table for now. We did talk last year about decoupling, and that's an idea that's still around. I think it's much harder to get that done in a Democrat-controlled Washington than it is in a Republican-controlled Washington. But you'll continue to see, some effort to chip away at that over time and perhaps set that up for consideration down the road. There may be some room for some incremental improvements. For example, allowing somebody who's still working after the age of 65, who really has to enroll in Medicare, allowing them to continue to contribute to their HSA. They can't do that today. Veterans who get their healthcare from the VA, people on TRICARE, and Native Americans who receive healthcare from the Indian Health Service can't today invest in an HSA or fund an HSA. And so these are all ideas that I think make a fair amount of sense to people on both sides of the aisle. It's hard to say why shouldn't a Native American have an HSA, just because they happen to get their healthcare from the Indian Health Service. And so I think those kinds of things have a reasonable chance of advancing in the current Congress. And that's really where the industry, I think, is going to start, is by continuing to try to get some meaningfully incremental improvements to HSAs through.
Yeah, awesome insights. I think it's really interesting. I think we're on a good momentum roll. So I kind of want to keep going in this direction, because I think in addition to some of those things you talked about, HSAs, like I know Biden, had quite a few things when he was running for president that he had talked about and platformed on when it came to healthcare. What are some of those things you think you'll also see in addition to? Because like his first day of presidency, he had a dozen executive orders. Some of them maybe kind of rescinding some of the stuff that Trump did. What do you see? What other changes do you see in the horizon?
Yeah, I do think you'll see a fair amount of activity in the regulatory arena. Because that's something that you can do without having to get it through that pretty closely divided Congress. Two things that I think will probably be rolled back will be Trump creations. The one is the short-term limited duration, the skinny plans. The Democrats hated those because if you look at the ACA, it's all about minimum essential benefits. It's don't allow people to buy insurance that doesn't comprehensively cover them. And the second is association health plans. That was another Trump creation. And I think that those are probably going to be rolled back if I had to bet my money. Clearly, I mean, both parties want to do something about drug pricing, but they just don't know how to do it. And so that was a big part of the Biden agenda last year. And the other one was surprise medical billing. There was already something done about surprise medical billing, so they may be able to declare victory and go home on that one. The rest of it's going to be hard. But drug pricing is something that's going to continue to be front and center, but it consumes a lot of oxygen because it's a hard, complex issue to tackle. And then the last one, this is kind of in the broad category, and it's a bit amorphous. I think that you will see a continued focus from the Biden administration, or an increased focus on what we call equity, right? Access, affordability of healthcare, particularly for marginalized communities and people of color, right? A focus on what they call the social determinants of health. where people who are members of certain communities tend to have worse health conditions, happen to have worse health outcomes. And it's believed that that's somewhat correlated to their access to quality health care, right? It's really hard to visualize exactly how that translates into any particular law or regulation. So we're going to have to see how that plays out. But I think you'll continue to see and hear quite a bit about that.
That's great. I love looking into the crystal ball, if you will, and just seeing what potentially could be coming. You just have such good insight. But, I think we've made it quite a ways into this podcast, and we haven't even mentioned the pandemic one time, which has to be a record in the last year. But, I just keep thinking about, COVID-19, and I'm just curious, because our lawmakers are so focused on the here and now and so focused on the pandemic, do you think that's going to prohibit any sweeping changes or big changes coming, or do you still see some of that on the horizon?
I think on balance, I think actually COVID-19 slightly increases the probability that something that's more sweeping could happen, because you can always wrap something in the mantle of pandemic relief, right? And as I mentioned with the ACA improvements, maybe you start small by saying, hey, we're just going to do this for a contained period of time to help people out during the pandemic. But as everybody knows, if you've watched Washington or even read the newspapers, if you will, once a program gets in place in Washington, it's awfully hard to roll it back. And so that's the kind of that's the kind of approach that may work here. One of the things, though, to keep in mind, and I don't mean to keep coming back to reconciliation, but there's going to be a reason why, and I'll tell you in a minute. You guys don't know this. Reconciliation allows you to get a bill through on a straight party line vote, but it doesn't allow you to put everything into that bill. In order to qualify for the budget reconciliation process, the bill has to affect the budget. It has to affect either federal outlays or federal revenues, right? And so there's a lot of things that likely can't get into a reconciliation bill. And there's a person called the Senate parliamentarian who actually decides, takes every element of a bill and says, this one's in, this one qualifies, this one doesn't qualify. And the process by which all that happens is a result of some legislation that was introduced decades and decades ago by a senator by the name of Byrd. Yes, spelled correctly, but no relation to mine. And the process of the parliamentarian deciding what's in, what's out is actually called the Byrd bath. So the Byrd bath is going to limit what can be in. So a good example would be raising the minimum wage to $15 may not make it through the Byrd bath, right? But ACA improvements like subsidies would, because they affect outlays. But back to the question, I think there is a little bit more that you can do to advance things in a pandemic, and then work later to make them permanent.
I love that.
Awesome.
The bird bath. I'm going to use that in regular conversation. Yeah, sorry, Kelsey, your request didn't make it through the bird bath.
I mean, who knew there was something called a bird bath other than that thing in your grandma's backyard,
That's awesome. Awesome insights. You said something that I'm going to push you on, Chris. You said it's really hard to roll some things back, once they kind of get, and I'm going to, if there was one thing that you think, Biden coming and looking at what some of the things that Trump did in his 4 years, if there was one thing maybe that the Trump administration did that you think might have a chance of seeing rolled back, because we're used to kind of going back and forth and kind of just seeing where the Senate and legislation takes us. But if there's one thing that we maybe have gotten used to that you think might get rolled back, what would it be?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Aside from the two regulations that I talked about, I don't see anything really under attack in the healthcare arena as being rolled back, right? I'm not an expert on areas of reproductive rights, right? There may be some things there where if the Trump administration did anything, I don't follow that stuff that closely, then you could potentially see the Biden administration saying, look, we've got to bring some of this stuff back. We've got to roll back some of the restrictions. But aside from that, I don't see a whole heck of a lot. I think the Biden agenda is really going to be more toward moving forward and trying to strengthen the ACA and allow more people to take advantage of that.
I think we've said this a few times in the past, but Chris, you're just gonna have to be a recurring guest. I think you're just gonna have to come back like monthly to talk about all this stuff.
Yeah, there's a reason you've been on the podcast more than any other guest we've had. So
yeah, we're still working on some sort of an award or
race.
You know,
we will come up with the appropriate recognition that makes sense for you. Maybe it's a bird bath you can put in here.
That's perfect.
Well, Chris,
I thought there was some kind of jacket.
Yes, that's right. I mentioned
the yellow jacket.
There was a jacket.
Gold one or wax red.
Yes, there you go. Wax red. I love that. I suppose that's a little bit better than a bird bath, but we'll see. We'll talk offline and come up with something that's worthy. Chris, thank you so much. This is always so beneficial. I love having you on the show. What a perfect way to kick off season 4. You look fantastic. Thanks for joining us on video too. This was a great discussion. We can't wait to see. Obviously, hey. There's a reason. We're going to see what happens in the next couple of months here. We got a season 4 that takes us through at least 5 or 6 months. So if we've got something that shakes up, legislation a little bit, there's no doubt, Chris, that we'll have you back in the show. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Chris.
Oh, always a pleasure, guys. Have a good one.
You bet. Take care.
Bye.
WEX is in the business of simplifying benefits for everyone. Now, although we certainly hope our podcast sparks some aha moments, like that was pretty cool, but of course we cannot provide legal, investment, or financial advice. And, well, therefore, nothing shared in this podcast should be interpreted as such. We encourage you to seek out appropriate professional advice regarding your plans. Hey, congratulations! You made it through our disclaimer. Thanks for listening.